Picture a nursery, warm, candle-lit, hung with tapestries embroidered in gold and crimson thread, a fire crackling in the hearth, a cradle carved from English oak, polished to a mirror shine, linen sheets bleached so white they almost hurt to look at. Now put a child in that cradle, a royal child, a child whose birth was announced by cannon fire, whose name was entered into the ledgers of every court in Europe before he could open his eyes properly, whose future has already been negotiated in letters between men who have never seen his face. Now, remove the mother, not dramatically, not with weeping or door slamming, just quietly, practically, the way you move furniture when it's gotten in the way. The mother goes back to her chambers, back to her duties, back to the endless machinery of court politics. Wet nurses arrive, rockers arrive, ladies of the nursery arrive, women with keys at their belts and authority in their eyes. And the child begins his life not as a son or a daughter, but as a position, a function, a future King of England wrapped in swaddling bands and managed by committee. That's Tudor England. That's where we're going tonight. I make these sleep histories, and honestly, I have no real idea who you are or what you're doing listening to a man describe the daily management of 16th century royal children at whatever time this is. Maybe you find this genuinely fascinating. Maybe you've tried everything else and this is the last thing standing between you and staring at the ceiling until 4 a.m. Either way, welcome. You're in the right place. Get comfortable. Pull the blanket up. Here we go. Your eyes open to stone, not metaphorically, literally. The ceiling above your bed is vaulted stone, pale grey in the pre-dawn dark, and the first thing you feel before you're fully awake is the cold radiating off it. Cold stone breathes differently than wood. It doesn't creak or settle the way a timber house does. It just sits there, massive and indifferent, pulling the warmth out of the air around it, with the patient efficiency of something that has been doing this for centuries and expects to be doing it for centuries more. The fire in the hearth has gone down overnight. It hasn't died entirely. There are still embers in there, orange-red against the ash, and someone will come soon to build it back up. That's their job. Everything in this place is someone's job. Everything is managed, administered, watched over by people with titles that describe precisely what they are responsible for, and nothing beyond that. The lady mistress is responsible for your person and your moral education. The chamberlain is responsible for the running of the household. The clerk of the kitchen is responsible for what reaches your table. The groom of the chamber sleeps outside your door, a fact you've known since you were old enough to know anything. A fact that still produces a low, strange feeling in your chest when you think about it. Someone sleeping outside your door, every night, their entire professional existence organized around the possibility that you might need something in the dark. You are 6 years old. You're a Prince of England. You have not seen your father in 4 months. The smell of the room hits you before full consciousness does, the way smells always do when you're still half in sleep. Wood smoke from the dying fire, sweet and slightly acrid where unseasoned wood burned toward the end of the night. The particular cold smell of stone, which is hard to describe to someone who hasn't spent time in old buildings. A smell like minerals, like time, like the inside of a well. The linen of your sheets, which were changed 3 days ago, and carry the faint ghost of the lavender and dried roses they're stored with between washings. The tallow candle on the side table, extinguished hours ago, but still present as a ghost of animal fat and char. And underneath all of it, the smell of the house itself, which is the smell of many people living in close proximity, cooking smells that rise from the kitchens 2 floors below, the smell of horses from the stable block across the courtyard, the indefinable smell of a building that's always occupied, always warmed by human bodies, always running. This is Hatfield. This is your house. Except it isn't. Quite. That's the thing you're only beginning to understand at 6 in the way that children understand things. Not fully, not with the vocabulary for it, but in the body, in the gut, in the way a thing settles into you before you have words to name it. This house is not yours the way a child's bedroom is theirs. This house is yours the way a ship belongs to its cargo. The cargo doesn't sail the ship. The cargo's protected by the ship, moved by the ship, kept safe inside the ship. But the ship follows orders from people in London, and what the cargo wants has very little to do with where they're going. Your name is Edward, Edward Tudor, Prince of Wales, son of Henry VIII, King of England, France and Ireland, defender of the faith, son of Catherine Parr, who is the 6th Queen, and still, as of this morning, alive, which is something you're old enough now to understand is not guaranteed. Your nurse, Mistress Sybil Penn, has a way of going very still and very careful when the subject of queens comes up. You've noticed. Children notice everything. They just don't always know what they're noticing. You push yourself up in the bed. These sheets resist slightly. They're heavy, good linen, not the scratchy rough stuff the servants sleep on, but still stiff in the cold. The mattress is thick with goose down, and for a moment before your feet touch the wooden step below the bed, you stay half in it, balanced between warmth and the knowledge that warmth is already temporary. Your feet find the step. The step is cold. Even through the thick wool of your bed socks, the cold comes through from the wood, which has been absorbing the chill of the stone floor all night. You stand. The cold rises up through the floor, through the step, up through the soles of your feet and into your ankles, a slow numbing that will last until the fire is properly built again. Around you, the room adjusts to your waking. There's a sound from just outside the door. The groom of the chamber shifting, becoming alert. A subtle change in the quality of the silence that tells you he's heard you move. You go to the window. The sky over Hertfordshire is the colour of pewter this morning. Flat and even. The kind of sky that can mean frost or rain, or simply a grey English autumn doing what grey English autumns do. The park stretches out below. The great deer park that belongs to the house, or rather to the crown, which at the moment means your father, which at the moment means a man whose face you carry in your memory, the way you carry the memory of a painting you've studied carefully, precisely rendered, faintly unreal. The deer are out already, pale shapes moving through the mist near the tree line. Their breath rises in small clouds. Even the deer have breath you can see. You put your finger against the glass and feel the cold come through immediately. The glass doing almost nothing to keep the chill out, just slowing it slightly. Hatfield House sits on a gentle rise above the town. You can't see the town from this window, just the park, the formal gardens below, the wall that marks the boundary of the estate, and beyond that the fields, beginning to show the brown of autumn ploughing. Somewhere out there, children are waking up in houses that are not managed by lords chamberlains and ladies mistresses. Children who will, if their fathers are farmers, go with their fathers to the fields. Who will, if their mothers are good wives, follow their mothers to the dairy or the kitchen. Who will learn to be what they are by being around the people who are already that thing. You'll learn to be king without ever spending a day near the man who is currently doing it. This is not unusual. This is in fact the rule. The door opens, Mistress Pen comes in first, or rather her skirts come in first. She wears so many layers that she seems to arrive in stages, rustling, the sound of wool and linen moving together, and then her face, round and warm and already fully awake, carrying the particular energized calm of a woman who has been up since before you woke and has opinions about what happens next. Behind her, two of the nursery maids with a fresh basin of water between them, steam rising from it in the cold air, the hot water kept hot by being carried as quickly as possible from the kitchen, and now losing its battle with the temperature of the room, even as they set it down. "Good morning, Your Grace," she curtsies. They all curtsy. Every person who enters this room, every person who addresses you bows or curtsies first, every single time, without exception. You have experienced this so consistently from the very beginning of your conscious memory that it doesn't feel like honour anymore. It feels like a door opening and closing, a mechanism. You are the thing that makes the mechanism operate the way a key makes a lock turn, but the lock isn't grateful and neither is the key. "Is it cold?" you ask. "It is, Your Grace. Sharp this morning. We'll have the fire properly built directly." The water in the basin is cooling rapidly, but still warm enough. One of the maids holds a cloth, wrung out, waiting. You let her wash your face and hands. The warmth of the cloth is startling after the cold, a brief, almost painful pleasure, the kind of physical comfort that lasts only seconds and then becomes simply the new baseline. The cloth smells of soap, hard soap with a faint herbal quality, rosemary or thyme, something they put in during making. It drags slightly across your cheekbones, the weave of it, a rough fine texture that is always the same every morning, the exact same sensation repeated with such consistency that you notice immediately today that the cloth is a different one than usual, slightly softer, newer. You notice things like this. You have a great deal of time to notice things. While one maid holds the towel and another tends to the fire, Mistress Penny begins the careful process of dressing you. This is not the quick, practical business of a child pulling on clothes. This is a ceremony with specific order and specific people assigned to specific parts of it, and it takes the better part of half an hour. The shirt first, white linen, pre-warmed near the fire by one of the maids who has been holding it at arm's length toward the newly built-up flames. The warmth of it against your skin as it goes over your head is a shock of comfort, and then immediately the cold air of the room begins working to counter it, so you're always in this strange equilibrium. The clothes warming you from inside while the room tries to cool you from outside. The doublet, the hose, the shoes, leather with a slight heel, and you hate them, have always hated them. They pinch at the toe on the right foot, and Mistress Pen has noted this, and the cordwainer has been notified, and new shoes have been ordered, and this process has been ongoing for approximately 3 weeks. In the meantime, the shoes continue to exist, and your right foot continues to express its objection, and every morning you pull your face into something neutral and put them on anyway, because complaining about shoes at length is not something a Prince of Wales does when there are other children in England who have no shoes at all, and Mistress Pen has told you this gently on at least 4 occasions. "Will Master Check come today?" you ask. "He's expected after morning prayers, Your Grace." You nod. "John Chick comes 3 days in the week, sometimes 4. He is your tutor, or one of them. There are others for different subjects. A music master on Tuesdays and Thursdays, a French master on Mondays and Wednesdays, a writing master who comes separately. But Check is the primary one, the the one responsible for Latin and Greek and rhetoric and classical history and the shape of your mind more generally. He's a young man for his position, perhaps 30, with a scholar's pallor and hands that always seem to be in the act of reaching for a pen even when he's not holding one. He takes his job seriously to a degree that is visible in his posture. He is also, you have noticed, afraid of your father. Everyone is afraid of your father. This is one of the first things a child learns in Tudor England, if the child is royal. Your father's name in certain rooms changes the quality of the air. It makes people still. It makes people choose words more carefully. It creates a specific quality of alertness that is different from the alertness produced by, say, an important noble visiting, or news from abroad, or a fire somewhere on the estate. Those alertnesses are practical, directed at concrete problems. The alertness produced by talk of your father is something older and deeper, the kind that lives in the body, in the set of the shoulders and the careful placement of the feet. You have never been afraid of your father, precisely because you have barely met him. The man you have met on the occasions you've been brought to court is enormous, the largest man you've ever seen, which you understand is only partly true, that he has become enormous in a way that has something to do with age and eating, and the kind of life that is lived without physical labour, but which to a child of 6 reads simply as enormousness. The way certain buildings are enormous, the way certain pieces of furniture are enormous, things scaled to a world where smaller creatures must navigate carefully. He is loud in a way that is also enormous. When he laughs, which he does, readily, this sound fills the room. When he doesn't laugh, the silence fills the room instead, and the silence is somehow louder than the laugh. He called you his pearl, his greatest pearl, Edward the Prince, his heir, his son, the thing he had waited for and worked for, and in several specific and well-documented ways destroyed his own life to obtain. He held your hand when you were brought to court, held it in his enormous hand that was already beginning to show the swelling in the joints that would worsen in the years ahead, and the warmth of that grip was real, unperformed, the warmth of a father, however briefly. And then you were put back in the carriage and sent back to Hatfield 4 months ago. 4 months minus 3 days. You know, because you counted. For the first 2 months you counted carefully. Then counting became a habit, and habits are hard to stop, even when they lead you somewhere uncomfortable. Mistress Penn is combing your hair. The comb catches on a tangle at the back, and she pauses, her fingers separating the hair with practised gentleness, working the tangle loose before the comb continues. The sound of it, the slight scrape of teeth through hair, the small tug and release, is one of those sounds that belongs entirely to this moment in the morning, to this routine, to this life. You stand still for it the way you've been trained to stand still, which is to say, completely. A prince must know how to hold himself, how to be a surface that other people act upon without reacting to each action in turn. You're 6 years old, and you are already very good at stillness. Through the window, the deer have moved further into the park. The frost you can see now is real, thin and white, along the edges of the garden beds below. The grass stiffened and pale. By mid-morning it will be gone if the sun comes out, but this morning it is real. You watch a deer lift its head and look at something you can't see from this angle. Some disturbance at the tree line, ears pivoting, absolutely motionless for a long moment before it lowers its head and returns to grazing. That's something you've thought about before. The way deer are so still when they're watching something. The way stillness is not the same as safety, but functions as a form of it. as a way of not yet being noticed. You've never said this to anyone. You're not sure you have the words for it yet at 6. But you've thought it, in the wordless way that children think things that haven't yet been connected to language. The prayers come first. They always come first. The chapel at Hatfield is on the ground floor, at the east end of the house, and in the morning it is the coldest room of all the cold rooms, because it has the largest windows, and those windows face north, and the stone of it is older than the rest, thicker, holding the dark and the cold the way old stone does, with a kind of geological permanence. The chapel smells of candles and incense and cold and something underneath all of that which is specific to places where people have been praying for a long time, a particular quality of the air, as though it has been breathed and rebreathed by generations of devout people, and carries some echo of their intention. You stand in your place at the front of the chapel while the chaplain reads. Your household stands behind you. Mistress Pennell, the ladies of the chamber, the senior servants, each in their assigned position. A human architecture of rank that mirrors the larger architecture of the court and the still larger architecture of the kingdom. Every person in their correct place. Every person aware of their place. The whole thing held in order by something that is partly tradition and partly genuine faith, and partly the very practical fear of what happens when order breaks down. You listen to the words, which are in English now, newly English, the English that your father's Reformation has imposed on worship. You've been told that this is correct, that the old Latin Mass was error and the new English service is truth. You believe this because you have been told to believe it, and because at 6 you do not have the framework to evaluate it, and also because the English words are honestly easier to follow than the Latin was, and following the words is one of the things you do during prayers, parsing sentences, holding the rhythm of them, a habit picked up from Chiek, who insists that listening carefully is itself a form of intelligence. After prayers, breakfast. The great hall is where the household eats together, all the various grades of servants and attendants at their assigned tables, the arrangement of the room itself a map of hierarchy. You eat at a separate table, elevated slightly on a dais, with Mistress Penn at your right hand and the comptroller of the household at your left. Your food is brought to you by the sewer, the serving officer, not what the word sounds like to a modern ear, in a specific order, with specific ceremony. Dishes are presented, tasted first by the taster, then offered to you. The tasting is not perfunctory. The taster takes a real mouthful, chews, waits a careful moment, then nods. Every morning, every meal, someone eating your food before you to make sure it won't kill you. The bread this morning is manchet, fine white bread, soft inside and slightly crisp at the crust, the best bread, the bread that marks your station as clearly as the doublet does. The servants eat coarser bread. Manchi is made from wheat flour, so finely sifted that it is almost white, and it costs considerably more than the bread most of England eats. You have eaten mancha every morning of your life and have never tasted the coarser bread and therefore cannot compare them, but you know the distinction exists because Mistress Penn has explained it, and because everything in this world has a distinction attached to it, a line running between what you are and what other people are, a line that you are meant to understand and inhabit. There is beef this morning, cold from last night's supper, served in thin slices. There is a pottage, a thick one, grain-based, with herbs. There is small beer, which is not strong, the alcohol present mainly to make the water safe, and which tastes of grain and something faintly sour, and which you have also drunk every morning of your conscious life and therefore cannot imagine not drinking. You eat with a spoon and a knife. The fork, which exists in Italy and France, has not yet made meaningful inroads into English table culture. You hold the knife the way you've been taught, which is not the way a child would naturally hold a knife. It requires a specific grip, a specific angle of the wrist, and you are aware of this as a performance even while doing it. Aware that the way you hold a knife is visible, is observed, is part of the ongoing assessment that is your life. Master Check arrives while you're still at breakfast. He doesn't interrupt the meal. That would be a breach of protocol. But you see him enter the hall at the far end, exchange a word with the chamberlain's secretary, and take a seat at one of the lower tables to wait. He has a book with him. He always has a book with him. You watch him open it without appearing to watch him, a skill you're developing, the ability to observe without being observed observing, which is more useful than it sounds. The book appears to be in Greek. Good. That means today will be Greek, and you prefer Greek to Latin, though you wouldn't say so to the French master who has a complicated relationship with the superiority of classical languages and tends to make the lesson painful when he feels his subject is being undervalued. When breakfast is cleared, the dishes removed in the same ceremonial reverse order they arrived, you rise, and the hall rises with you, everyone standing until you've left the room. Every room you leave, everyone stands. Every room you enter, everyone stands. The rising and the standing and the bowing have become so constant a texture of your experience that you almost don't feel them anymore, except when you do, suddenly, in moments when you catch the movement out of the corner of your eye and think, all these people standing because I walked through a door. What would it be like, you wonder sometimes, to walk through a door and have nobody notice? You have never experienced that. You're 6 years old and you have never in your life walked through a door without someone noticing. The schoolroom is on the upper floor, a room with 2 south-facing windows that catch the morning light when there is morning light, which there isn't quite enough of today. The sky still flat and pewter grey. There is a desk for you, solid oak with a slanted writing surface, and a chair, and a second chair for Master Check, positioned beside and slightly behind yours, close enough to watch your work, far enough to maintain the distinction of student and teacher, near enough and far enough at once, the distances in this house always carrying meaning. Good morning, Your Grace. Check bows. You nod. He opens the Greek text. Aesop, you can see the title, a familiar collection, and places it on the desk. Beside it, a wax tablet for rough work, a quill, an ink pot, a ruler, long and wooden, which Check has never used on you but whose presence you understand is a statement about the relationship between effort and consequence. We'll begin with translation, Check says. The Fable of the Oak and the Reed. Your Grace will recall we began it Wednesday. You do recall it. The oak, which is large and strong and proud, is destroyed by a storm it was too rigid to bend in. The reed, which is small and flexible, survives by bending with the wind. There is a moral. There is always a moral. Aesop's fables are, among other things, an extended lesson in the application of morals, and Cheeky is nothing if not methodical about the application of lessons to life. The oak tells the reed it is weak, Cheek says. Let us translate. First word. Druz, you say. Oak. Good. And the verb. The oak says, lazy. Present tense. Third person, singular. Good. This is the morning. This is what the morning is for you at Hatfield in the autumn of 1544. Latin or Greek, translation and grammar, the careful parsing of meaning from ancient words, Each word identified and placed in its category, each sentence unpacked like a parcel, the contents examined and named. This is what will make you fit to be a king. Not watching your father rule, not sitting in council, not riding with the armies that are even now, somewhere in France, engaged in the business of war that your father pursues with the same enormous, exhausting energy he brings to everything. You learn to be king by reading the words of men who described what kings were and should be, 3,000 years before you were born, in a language that required its own separate learning just to access. Czech is explaining the philosophy behind this, somewhat obliquely, as he often does when he wants to communicate something he isn't sure is entirely his place to say. The ancient Greeks believed, he says, that a ruler who had not read widely was merely a man with a title, that the breadth of the reading was itself the preparation. Plato's philosopher kings. Your Grace has heard me speak of Plato. Yes. Plato believed that the man most fit to rule was the man who least wanted to rule, that power sought by those who desire it is power corrupted by desire, that the proper king is the reluctant king, the one who rules because it is his duty and not because it is his pleasure. A pause. The fire in the schoolroom hearth is better than the one in the chapel, built up properly since before you woke, and the room is approaching something like comfortable. The warmth makes the smell of the room more present, the beeswax of the candles, the parchment smell of the books on the small shelf behind Cheek's chair, the ink in the ink pot dark and slightly metallic. Does your Grace understand the distinction? I think so, you say. A king who wants to be king might do things for the kingdom that serve himself. A king who rules from duty would do things that serve only the kingdom. Czech looks at you with the particular expression that means you've said something he considers promising. It's not praise, exactly. It's more like the expression a carpenter makes when a piece of wood turns out to be the right grain for the work. Satisfaction, professional rather than personal. Precisely, he says. Well reasoned, Your Grace. Now, the reed. You return to the Greek. The thing about the schoolroom, the thing you haven't been able to fully articulate even to yourself, is that it is also the only place in the house where the gap between what you are and what you are doing closes completely. In the schoolroom, you're a student who is a prince, yes, and Czech will never forget that. But the work of translation and grammar is work that functions on its own terms regardless of who is doing it. The Greek doesn't care that you are a prince. The declension table doesn't bow when you enter. The right answer is simply right, and the wrong answer is wrong, and there's a clarity in that which isn't available in other parts of your life. You're good at the work. That's not self-congratulation. Cheek has said so in his careful way, and he doesn't say things carelessly. You hold language well. Reach for words with a precision that he marks as unusual for your age. Latin came quickly. Greek is harder, but the architecture of it pleases you. The way it is built, the way meaning is carried in the ending of words rather than their position. A different logic from English. An elegance that you find, though you don't have this word yet, beautiful. The morning passes in Greek. Then the French master arrives and Greek becomes French. The lesson moving from the ancient to the merely foreign, from Aesop to basic French grammar and conversation, practiced slowly while the French master, a man named Dubois, small and precise, with the air of someone perpetually on the verge of being offended by something, makes small adjustments to your pronunciation with the delicacy of a man handling expensive glassware. Non, Your Grace. This nasal. So, N-O-N. Again. Non. Better, but you asked to curl it back just slightly. The English R is 2. It sits in the front of the mouth. The French R has more. He makes a gesture with one hand that seemed to indicate depth, interior space. More room. Non, you say again, placing the R differently. Dubois nods with the expression of a man who has accepted a lesser version of what he wanted. Better. Now, je suis le fils du roi. Repeat. Je suis le fils du roi. I am the son of the king. The French master doesn't notice the particular quality of the silence that follows this sentence. He's already moving on to the next construction. But you sit with it for a moment, the sentence in your mouth, I am the son of the king, and feel the specific weight of it, the thing it means and the distance between what it means and what your daily life actually contains. Je suis le fils du roi. And yet, the letter arrives in the afternoon. Letters arrive regularly from various people on various matters, and you are not routinely shown them. That's the business of the chamberlain and the secretary, the administrative machinery of your household running quietly in the background. But occasionally a letter is brought to you directly, or rather brought to Mistress Penn, who brings it to you, and these letters are almost always from your father or stepmother. Today it is your stepmother. Queen Catherine Parr, who is the 6th and currently most durable of the queens, a woman you remember as warm-voiced and sharp-eyed and genuinely kind, in a way that some of the adults in your life are kind strategically, but she is kind as a baseline, a default setting. She writes that she hopes you are well, that she's been thinking of you and of your studies, and is pleased to hear from Master Check that your Greek is advancing, that the weather in London is grey and cold, and the court has removed to Hampton Court for a time, which you may recall from your visit there last spring, the river very fine from the windows of the gallery. She hopes you're eating well and sleeping soundly, and that Mistress Penn is taking good care of you. She does not say when you will next come to court. She does not say when you will see your father. She writes that your sister Mary sends her love, which is interesting since your sister Mary is at this moment at her own establishment at Hunsdon, 40 miles north, and it is not entirely clear how much Mary's love can be accurately conveyed second-hand through a stepmother. But the sentiment is there, the network of affection, attenuated by distance and intermediaries, still attempting to function. Your other sister Elizabeth is at Ashridge, 20 miles from here as the crow flies, which in this era means several hours by horse, a distance that might as well be a country. 3 children, 3 royal children, 3 separate establishments, 3 separate sets of servants, governors, nurses, tutors, chamberlains, cooks, grooms, footmen, ladies, secretaries, 3 separate households being maintained at considerable royal expense, in 3 separate locations, managing 3 separate children who are each technically the children of the same man, and who communicate primarily through letters carried by messengers on horseback. This is normal. This is how it has always been done. You fold the letter carefully. Mistress Penny has been watching you read it with an expression that contains approximately equal parts warmth and caution, the look of a person who cares about a child and also doesn't know how to help them with the particular thing this child needs help with, which is also not a thing anyone can actually help with. Her Grace the Queen is well? Mistress Penny asks. She writes that she is, you say. Good. That is very good news. A pause, the length of which contains several unspoken things, and then Mistress Penn picks up her needlework again, and you go back to the passage from Cicero you were working through before the letter arrived, and the afternoon continues. The house around you continues too, beneath and above the quiet of the schoolroom. You can hear it if you listen, the sounds of a large establishment in its afternoon work. The distant clatter from the kitchens below, where the preparation of supper is already underway, the sound of metal on metal, the rhythmic thudding of something being chopped. Voices somewhere in the corridor, low-pitched, the kind of voices that are being deliberately kept low out of awareness of the rooms they're passing. The creak of the main staircase that runs from the ground floor to the upper chambers, a creak so specific and so regular that you've come to know it the way you know faces. The creak means the staircase is being used, and the heaviness or lightness of the tread tells you something about who. That particular tread is heavy. That's the comptroller of the household, Richard Cook, a solid man whose footfall announces him 2 rooms ahead. He appears in the doorway of the schoolroom a moment later, knocks against the frame, already open, and waits. Your Grace, a messenger from London. Something shifts in the air. Mistress Penn looks up from her needlework. Cheek, who has returned for the afternoon session, marks his place in the text with a slip of paper. Everyone in the room very slightly recalibrates their attention, orienting it toward the door, toward the messenger who is presumably in the corridor, toward what he might be carrying. London means the court. The court means the king. Anything from the king changes things. "Thank you, Master Cook," you say, steady voice. You've been practicing steadiness, though you couldn't explain this to anyone. Please show the messenger to the hall and have him wait. Cook's expression contains a brief moment of, not surprise exactly, but acknowledgement. You said the right thing, the formal thing, the thing that handles the situation correctly without running at it. Of course, Your Grace. He withdraws. Shall we continue? You say to Check. Check looks at you for a moment with the evaluative expression. Then, of course, Your Grace. You return to Cicero. The messenger's news, delivered to the chamberlain and relayed to you by Mistress Penn after supper, is this. His Majesty the King will be receiving certain ambassadors at Hampton Court in a fortnight's time, and it is His Majesty's pleasure that Prince Edward be present at court for this occasion. A fortnight, 14 days. You are going to see your father in 14 days. The feeling this produces is complicated, and you don't examine it too closely, because examining complicated feelings requires a vocabulary for it that you're only beginning to acquire. But it is there, something tightening in your chest that is equal parts anticipation and a kind of preparatory nervousness, a bracing against impact that is neither entirely good nor entirely bad, only big. 14 days. You count them. Of course you count them. The days at Hatfield have a texture that is almost geological in its consistency. They are formed in layers, morning prayers and then breakfast and then Cheek and then the French master and then dinner in the middle of the day and then the afternoon, which is sometimes more lessons and sometimes exercise in the gallery when the weather doesn't permit the garden, and sometimes the music master with his lute and his precise, patient attention to the position of your fingers on the strings. The lute requires a stillness and a delicacy that is not completely unlike the stillness of being a prince, except that the lute provides something in return for the stillness, a sound, a resonance, a vibration you can feel through the wood of the instrument into the pads of your fingers, and this feedback from the world is something that the role of prince, as a general rule, does not provide. A prince acts upon the world reacts to the prince. But this reaction is always mediated, always managed, always occurring through layers of ceremony and hierarchy. The lute is different. The lute responds to your fingers with the directness of a living thing. the sound changing immediately and honestly with pressure and angle, telling you plainly when you've done it wrong and unmistakably when you've done it right. You're learning to love the lute. On the third day after the messenger's arrival, it rains. Real rain, not the soft drifting thing that grey English autumn produces routinely, but a serious committed rain that arrives in the night and is still fully operational by the time you're at prayers in the morning, drumming against the windows of the chapel with the persistence of something that has made an executive decision about the day. The floors inside the house take on a faint damp smell. The fires are built higher, pulling harder at the drafts that run through the building, and the smoke makes the air inside slightly hazy. The tapestries developing a faint mustiness that comes out whenever the weather is this determined. On this day, because the garden is impossible, and the gallery walk is being used by the workmen repairing a section of the south wall, a repair that has been ongoing for 3 weeks, and that involves periodic hammering that makes sustained concentration in the nearby rooms difficult. You end up in the library. The library at Hatfield is not large. It contains perhaps 200 volumes, which by the standards of most households is extraordinary, and by the standards of the Royal Collection is modest. There are chronicles of English history, several of them, the massive heavy things with pages that smell of vellum and age and the particular dry dust of paper that has been sitting undisturbed for decades. There are devotional texts in Latin and English. There are copies of the classical authors, Virgil, Cicero, Caesar, and several in Greek. There are some volumes that Cheek has brought himself and left here for your use, a private scholarly loan that functions as an extension of the lessons. And there is a box. The box is wooden, medium-sized, iron-bound at the corners, kept in the low cupboard below the main shelving. It contains the household's private correspondence, organised chronologically, managed by the secretary. You're not supposed to know this is here. The adults in your life have a theory of childhood that involves managing information carefully, deciding what you're ready for and when, doling it out in pedagogically appropriate portions. This is a reasonable position. It is not, however, a position that survives contact with a child who has too much time, access to most of the house, and a natural inclination toward understanding systems. You have known about the box for 2 months. You have opened it once. What you found there was not the correspondence itself. The secretary keeps that locked separately, but an inventory of the household's accounts, 2 years of quarterly records, columns of numbers representing the cost of running your establishment, the food, the fuel, the wages, the clothing, the furnishings, the horses, the physician's visits. You had a bad cough last winter that lasted 6 weeks and cost, according to this document, a sum that seems extraordinary, though you don't yet have the full context to evaluate it accurately. What struck you, reading that inventory, quickly in the few minutes before anyone was likely to come looking, was not the numbers themselves, but what the numbers implied. That your existence, your daily life, this house and these people, and this running routine of prayers and Greek and manchet bread, cost a very specific and very large amount of money every single quarter, and that money came from somewhere, went through specific people on its way to specific places, and your father authorised it, which meant your father thought about it, which meant in some specific practical way your father thought about you. Not in the way a father thinks about a child they see daily, but in the way a king thinks about a ward. You put the inventory back in the box and have not opened it since. You've thought about it quite a lot. Today, in the library during the rain, you sit at the reading table with Caesar's Gallic Wars, which Chica signed last week, and which you have been reading with genuine interest, not merely as a lesson. There is something about the directness of Caesar's Latin that functions differently from Cicero's complexity, a clarity that moves fast, that describes action in a way that makes the action feel present and real. The army's moving, the rivers forded, the bridges constructed with a speed that even now, reading about it nearly 1600 years later, seems slightly implausible. The Gauls making their stands, retreating, fighting back, losing. Caesar never explains why he's writing this down. He just describes it. In the third person, as if he's writing about someone else entirely, as if the man directing the battles and the man describing them are two separate beings. You find this interesting. Mistress Penny is sewing near the window, the grey light from the rain making the work slightly difficult, her needle moving through linen with the steady rhythmic efficiency of long practice. One of the ladies is reading aloud to her from a devotional text, the reading soft, monotonous, pleasantly dull, the words washing over the room without demanding too much attention. The fire snaps. The rain continues its argument with the windows. Outside, somewhere in the courtyard, a horse is being walked, its hooves on the wet cobblestones making a sound that is both heavy and slightly hollow, the wet air changing the acoustic. One of the groom's voices calling to someone else, too distant and too muffled to make out the words. The world goes on, outside. Practical, physical, muddy, wet. In here, Caesar crosses the Rhine for the second time. Master Czech says, you say, without looking up from the page, that Caesar was the best general Rome produced. Mistress Penn looks up from her sewing. She's not a woman who dismisses things said to her. And what does your Grace think? I think he might be right, but Caesar wanted to be king and they killed him for it. That's true. My father could have been killed for wanting to be head of the church, you say. Some people tried, but he wasn't. A silence. Mistress Penn sets her needle down carefully. The lady reading pauses in her text, holds her place with one finger. Your father is a great king, Mistress Penn says, carefully. The word carefully does a lot of work in this sentence. I know, you say. I was thinking about the difference between what you want to be and whether you survive wanting it. Another pause, longer this time. Perhaps, Mistress Penn says, that is a question for Master Cheek. Perhaps, you agree. You return to Caesar. The rain lasts 2 days. On the third morning, the sky clears to a hard, brilliant blue. The kind of blue that English weather produces after committed rain as if in apology, and the garden is available again, the gravel paths between the knot gardens damp but walkable, the grass at the edges of the park still wet, the deer back in their usual places, and you walk in the garden for an hour with Mistress Penny and 2 of the ladies, and it is almost pleasant, the cold air clean washed by the rain, smelling of wet earth, and the slight sweetness of the last autumn roses still holding on in the sheltered bed against the south wall. Here is the thing about the garden, which you've understood for a while. It is the only place in the house where something happens spontaneously. In the house, everything is scheduled and managed. The lessons have their times, the meals have their ceremonies. The movements through the house from room to room follow patterns that have been established by practice and protocol, and the preferences of the adults responsible for you. Nothing happens in the house without it having been, at some level, planned. In the garden, a robin appears. This is not planned. The robin is on the gravel path about 6 feet ahead of you, small and absolutely still, watching you approach with the intense, sideways attention of a bird that hasn't decided yet whether to fly. Its chest is the colour of embers, vivid against the grey gravel and the damp green of the hedges. You slow your pace without thinking. Mistress Penne, slightly behind you, slows with you. Everyone slows. The robin holds its ground for another moment. You stop completely. The robin cocks its head, a tiny movement, purely mechanical, one eye swinging to examine you from a new angle, and then, unhurried, it hops sideways once, twice, onto the grass border, and you move past. He wasn't afraid, you observe. Robins rarely are, Mistress Penn says. They're brave little things. Is it brave if you don't understand the danger? She considers this. Possibly it's only brave if you do understand it and act anyway. You think about this for the rest of the walk. 11 days to court. The preparation begins, as all preparations in your household begin, by being mapped. The chamberlain drafts a plan. How many people will travel with you? Which servants and which officers? What will be required in terms of horses and carriages and accommodation along the road? What clothing you will need for the visit to court? What gifts you might appropriately bring or might expect to receive? What lessons can be suspended for the travel period? And what correspondence the tutor should send with you to ensure continuity of your studies? It is a remarkable amount of organisation for the movement of one 6-year-old child, but this is the reality of being a royal child in Tudor England. You cannot simply be taken somewhere. You must be processed through the machinery of your household, your requirements assessed and prepared for, your safety ensured by the presence of sufficient people to ensure it, your dignity maintained by the presence of sufficient people to maintain it. A king's son who arrives at court with too small a retinue is a king's son whose household has failed. A king's son who arrives at court with an inadequate wardrobe, or who cannot be presented in his proper state, is a king's son whose governors have been negligent. These failures reflect not on you, at 6, but on the people responsible for you. And those people are deeply motivated not to be found wanting. New clothes arrive from London 3 days before the planned departure. The tailor comes with them, a small, serious Londoner who treats fabric with the reverence that Cheek brings to classical texts, examining each seam with the expression of a man who has seen seams go wrong in professionally embarrassing ways and will not permit it to happen to him. The doublet is crimson. That's your father's colour. Tudor crimson, the red that runs through everything, that appears in the royal arms and on the royal banners, and in the choices of people who wish to express their connection to royal power. On you, it's startling. You are pale in the way that fair-haired children are pale, and the crimson makes you look, standing before the mirror in Mistress Penne's chamber, where the light is best, like a child being consumed by a flag. Very fine, Mistress Penn says. The tailor adjusts something at the shoulder, his touch light and precise, 2 fingers pressing a seam into its proper position. The padding here, he says, half to himself, and sits better so. He produces pins from a small cushion on his wrist and makes a minute adjustment. The doublet is padded at the shoulders in the fashion of the moment, which adds a broadness to your silhouette that is not yet naturally yours and that, you understand without anyone saying it, is the point. A prince appears broad-shouldered. A prince appears to take up space. Even a 6-year-old prince. The shoes are new too. The right one doesn't pinch. You notice this immediately and are obscurely, privately grateful, in the way that the resolution of a minor chronic discomfort produces relief disproportionate to the original problem. The night before the departure, you don't sleep well. This is not surprising. You lie in the familiar dark of the attic room. No, not the attic, your chamber, the proper chamber with the carved bed, and listen to Hatfield settling around you. It sounds different now in the way that things you're about to leave always sound slightly different, as if your attention has changed the quality of the listening, the creak of the house, the fire dying down, the groom of the chambers breathing from beyond the door, steady and slow. 14 days ago you didn't know you were going. Tomorrow you will be going. And in 14 days you will be back here presumably, and the house will be exactly the same, and Czech will have left a passage of Caesar for you to work through, and the robin may or may not be in the garden, and your father will be wherever kings go between the occasions of their children's visits. You're not sure if you're looking forward to the journey or to the return. You fall asleep thinking about this and dream about the deer in the park, but in the dream they are much closer, and one of them looks at you with an expression of patient, steady evaluation, and you don't run, and neither does it, and this seems, in the way of dreams, to be exactly correct. The road to Hampton Court takes 2 days, with a night at an inn in Enfield, a respectable establishment prepared in advance for your arrival, rooms cleared and cleaned, and a fire built in the best chamber before you get there. The journey itself is experienced largely from inside a carriage, a heavy, curtained thing that moves with the particular rhythm of a vehicle whose suspension design has not yet grasped the concept of passenger comfort. The wheels finding every variation in the road surface and transmitting it faithfully to everything and everyone inside. You hate the carriage, not violently. You've been trained out of violent feeling about things you can't change, or rather you've trained yourself, which is different. But the carriage is a cage that moves, a swaying, jouncing, closed-in box that gives you no sense of where you are or what you're moving through, only the sounds, the creak and groan of the joints, the rumble of the wheels, the hooves of the horses pulling it, and the hooves of the escort riding alongside, the calls of the riders when they need to communicate something, the entirely unhelpful sound of rain beginning again on the second morning. You're allowed, occasionally, to ride, when the road is good enough, and Mistress Penn judges the weather suitable, and the escort is properly arranged, you can have a horse. Your horse is a dark bay gelding called Brutus, a name you did not give him, and whose sauce cheek has not yet managed to turn into a lesson, despite several attempts. Brutus is compact and steady and very patient with the specific requirements of carrying a 6-year-old rider who is still learning to negotiate the relationship between intention and execution in the saddle. On horseback the world opens. This is the only way to describe it. The carriage closes the world down to the interior of a box. The horse puts you in the world directly, in the air, in the sensations. The horse's warmth rising up through the saddle, the movement of the anatomel beneath you that requires constant small adjustments of your weight and balance, the wind against your face, and the whole panorama of the Hertfordshire countryside in its November condition. Fields ploughed and resting, hedgerows bare, the trees holding the last of their colour in the rain-washed air. You ride with the escort for an hour and a half on the second morning, long enough to warm through the exercise, long enough to feel the particular kind of tiredness that comes from physical work, rather than the mental tiredness of the schoolroom. A good tiredness, clean and direct. Then Mistress Penn decides the sky is threatening and you go back in the carriage. Hampton Court appears in the late afternoon of the second day, and you see it first from a rise in the road, where the trees open briefly on the left side and the Thames is visible below, and on the far bank the palace. You have been here before. You know what you're seeing, and still the sight of it does what it apparently always does, which is to make the thing you're looking at the most real thing visible, the centre of whatever scene it's placed in, the rest of the world organising itself around it. Hampton Court is enormous and red. That's the primary impression at distance. An enormous amount of red brick, more red brick than seems necessary, arranged in towers and ranges and courtyards that from a distance resolve into a single, massive horizontal mass, only the towers rising to provide vertical counterpoint. The chimneys, there are hundreds of chimneys, this is not hyperbole. The palace's heating requirements are supplied by so many fireplaces that the chimneys above it form their own skyline. The chimneys send thin threads of smoke into the cooling air, pale grey against the darker sky. Above the gatehouse, the royal standard. Your father is here. The carriage slows as it makes the turn that leads to the river crossing, and you feel the pace change. The horses steadying, the whole retinue reorganising itself into its proper ceremonial order for the arrival. Mistress Penn is checking your appearance, straightening your collar, smoothing the front of the doublet, running her eyes across your face with the professional efficiency of someone performing a final quality check before the product is presented. "You look very well," she says, warmly, genuinely, not performing. "Thank you," you say. And then, because you are 6 and something has been building in you for 2 days and apparently now is when it comes out, "Do you think he will know I've grown?" A brief pause. "Of course he will," Mistress Penny says. "Fathers always know. You know enough to know that this is partly kindness. You accept it anyway. The gatehouse of Hampton Court is tall enough that the carriage passes through it without any reduction in size. A tunnel of brick and shadow and the smell of stone and old wood, and then the outer court, and then the inner gatehouse, and then the clock court, where the astronomical clock on the gateway, a magnificent, overcomplicated piece of mechanical ambition that tells you not only the time, but the phase of the moon, and the position of the sun, and several other pieces of information simultaneously, catches your eye the way it always catches your eye, because it is the kind of object that compels attention. A human attempt to represent time itself as a mechanical system, to make the universe comprehensible by making it smaller. The clock says it is 3:15 in the afternoon. You have been travelling for most of 2 days. You are 6 years old and you're very tired, and your right leg, which was pressed against the side of the carriage for most of the last hour, is slightly numb. And your father is somewhere in this building. The ceremony of arrival begins immediately. Stewards appear. Introductions are made. Members of your own household interface with members of the court household with the slightly careful diplomacy of 2 organisations whose jurisdictions border each other and whose members are professionally aware of the boundary. There are rooms for you, chambers prepared in the East Range, not the principal royal apartments which are your father's, but good rooms, warm rooms, with fires already built and beds already made. And then, before supper, before anything else, your father's chamberlain arrives to say that the king will receive you. The receiving room is on the upper floor of the main range, a room you've been in before, but that still produces the same effect. Too much of everything, too much colour in the tapestries that cover every wall, scenes of hunting and allegory and biblical narrative in wool and silk and metallic thread, the figures in them almost life-sized, a crowd of woven people watching from the walls, too much gilding on the ceiling, on the window frames, on the chairs, too much candlelight from the chandelier overhead, making everything flicker and double, and in the chair at the far end, not a throne exactly, but a chair whose scale and position make it function as one. Your father. He is bigger than you remembered, and also the same as you remembered, because the size of him was already extraordinary, and you had been carrying the size in your memory accurately. He's dressed in black today, which surprises you. You remember him most often in colour, in the crimson and cloth of gold that suits the public image he has spent his life constructing. But black with embroidery in silver thread, black with jewels at his collar and his fingers, black that makes him look darker and weightier, and if possible more solid than normal, like someone has added extra mass to an already massive structure. The leg. You notice the leg, as you notice it each time you see him, because it is impossible not to notice. The left leg, wrapped and supported and held differently from the right, carrying the evidence of the wound that has been with him for years, and that you understand from carefully overheard adult conversations has been getting worse. He holds his weight slightly differently because of it, sits differently, exists in the room around it. He is looking at you. The look is direct, total, the kind of attention that doesn't divide itself. When your father looks at you, you understand viscerally what it means to be the object of someone's complete focus. It is not entirely comfortable. It is not entirely uncomfortable. It is simply overwhelming. The way standing very close to a fire is overwhelming. You feel the warmth and also the potential for burning. Edward. His voice fills the room with no visible effort. You walk forward. You bow. Properly, the way you've been taught. The way you've been practicing since before you could fully understand why you were practicing. The right depth, the right duration, the smooth rise back to standing. Your Majesty. A silence. Then he leans forward slightly, reaching out in his hand. The enormous, jewel-weighted, slightly swollen hand comes out and you feel it close around yours, and the warmth of it is the same as you remember, the same as the letters can't communicate, immediate and real. You've grown, he says. Mistress Penn was right. I have been studying very hard, Your Majesty, you say. Have you? Not quite a question. Greek, Your Majesty, and French. Master Cheek says my Greek is advancing well. Something moves across your father's face, complex and fast, there and gone. Pride, possibly. The recognition of himself in something you've said. He valued his own education. You know this. Spent his youth at his books before the requirements of kingship overtook the luxury of scholarship. Sit, he says, and indicates a stool set next to his chair. You sit on the stool, and for the next hour, he talks to you. Not at you, not the ceremonial exchange of a king receiving a subject. He talks to you about Caesar. Someone has briefed him about your current studies, which is a small thing and also not a small thing. The briefing meaning he asked. Asking meaning he thought to ask. Thinking to ask meaning he was thinking about you in a specific and particular way. He talks about Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon, which you haven't gotten to yet in your reading, and he explains it. The river that formed the boundary of Roman Italy, the rule that said no general could bring his army across it, and Caesar choosing to cross anyway, choosing to commit to the irrevocable thing, the act that turned a general into a rebel, into a dictator, into the event that ended the Roman Republic. The Rubicon, your father says, is not just a river. Every man has a Rubicon, the moment before which you can turn back and the moment after which you cannot. The knowledge of which moment is which. That's the difference between a commander and a man who merely holds a command. You listen with every part of you that knows how to listen. He asks you questions. He listens to your answers in the same direct, total way he looks at you, giving each answer its full attention. He corrects you twice, gently, on points of Roman history that you had slightly wrong. You accept the corrections without self-consciousness, because he accepts them without making them punishments. For an hour, you're simply a boy talking to his father about history. It is the best hour you have had in 4 months. And then the chamberlain appears at the door, and your father receives some communication, and the look on his face changes. Something closing, something that was open becoming closed, the king reappearing over the father, and he squeezes your hand once, the same warmth, and says, "We will talk again before you leave." The chamberlain has your father's attention. The business of the kingdom has your father's attention. You stand, you bow, and you are guided by a court official out of the receiving room and back through the corridors to your own apartments. The door closes. You stand in your room, the fire burning, your servants in their various positions. Mistress Pen already moving toward you with the expression that asks whether you are all right. You are all right. You are right now, genuinely all right. But the hour is already getting smaller, already receding into memory, already becoming the thing you will carry back to Hatfield in 2 weeks' time, to take out and examine on the evenings when the house is quiet and the fire is low, and the counted days between now and the next visit are already beginning to accumulate. Supper at court is different from supper at Hatfield, not in kind but in scale, in the specific weight of attention on everything that happens. At Hatfield you are the centre of the household's regard by virtue of your position, but the household is small enough that this regard is also personal, is also Mistress Pen knowing your habits, and the cook knowing your preferences, and the gardener knowing to pick the late roses before the frost takes them, because you like to see the roses from the gallery. At court, the regard is more formal, more public, more performance. Supper at court is eaten in a great hall with 100 people, and everything that happens to you during supper, what you're served, how it's served, where you sit, who sits near you, all of it is visible to everyone, and everyone is looking with the particular attention of people who are reading the social information embedded in physical arrangements. Where you sit tells them something, what you're served tells them something. Whether your father acknowledged you today, how long the audience lasted, whether he smiled. All of this is information that the court absorbs and analyzes and discusses later, in the rooms where such discussions happen, because in the Tudor court information is currency and people trade in it constantly. You eat manchet and some kind of elaborate meat dish in a sauce you can't entirely identify, and you drink small beer, and you maintain your posture and your expression and your awareness of being watched. And when someone speaks to you, you respond correctly, and when no one speaks to you, you eat in composed silence. And all of this is fine. You can do all of this, but underneath it, the hour with your father is still there, warm and receding, and you hold it in your chest like an ember, careful not to touch it too directly. The days at court have their own rhythm, different from Hatfield's but no less organised. There are more people, more ceremony, more occasions where you must appear, must present yourself correctly, must be the Prince of Wales in a way that is public and visible and competent. You meet your stepmother, Queen Catherine, on the second day. She is warm-voiced and sharp-eyed in real life, exactly as you remembered her, and she asks you about your studies with genuine interest, and listens to your answers in a way that tells you she already knew what the answers would approximately be, and is checking the reality against the reports she's received. She's also, you notice, watching your father when she thinks no one is watching her. and the look she gives him when he's not looking is a look that contains things you can't fully read yet, but that are recognizable as adult and complicated and slightly worried. You don't ask about this. There are a great many things you don't ask about. Your sister Mary is also at court, it turns out, for this same occasion, arriving the day after you. You see her across the great hall at supper before you're formally brought together, and the sight of her is strange in the way that family is strange when you don't see them enough. She is familiar and also slightly foreign. Her face recognizable, but her person somehow more than you were remembering, more present, more specific, more real than the Mary who exists in your memory from the last visit. Mary is 28, 22 years older than you, your half-sister, technically, from your father's first marriage, which is a category of distinction you're beginning to understand has significance. That the half is not merely a biological notation but a political one, a line that others draw and that Mary lives with in ways you're not yet equipped to fully understand. She is serious in a way that reads as severity until you know her better, and then reads as wariness, the wariness of a person who has learned through specific and painful experience that the world she's navigating requires constant, careful attention. She is kind to you. She always has been. She brings you a gift, a small painted book, devotional images, the colours very fine. And she asks about your French with the slightly competitive warmth of someone who is excellent at French herself and wants to know where you are relative to her. Dubois says the R is wrong, you tell her. It's always the R, she says. That particular sound doesn't come naturally to the English tongue. I spent 3 months on it. A pause. Are you happy at Hatfield? The question surprises you. Not because it's an unusual question. Mistress Penny asks something similar periodically. But because Mary asks it looking at you directly, and the looking is different from Mistress Penn's looking. Mary's look has something in it that is personal experience. Mary has been sent to her own household, removed from court, separated from everything familiar, not once but multiple times, not for the ordinary reasons of household management that govern your arrangements, but for political reasons, reasons involving the king's anger and the question of her legitimacy, and a decade of her life lived in a kind of official uncertainty that you only understand in the very broadest strokes. Yes, you say, mostly. Mostly, she repeats, and nods once as if this is a more honest answer than she expected, and she respects it more for its honesty. I like the lessons, you say. And the garden? I would like to see father more. Yes, Mary says, we all would. We all... A pause between you, slightly longer than comfortable, filled with the things neither of you can say about the man who is your father and who is sitting 20 feet away at the high table, discussing something with an ambassador, his enormous presence filling that corner of the room. He loves you, Mary says. She says it in the tone of someone reporting a fact she's had to work to reconcile herself to. More than he shows. More than he knows how to show. That's something you'll understand better when you're older. You nod. You don't entirely understand this, but you store it, carefully, in the place where you keep things that haven't yet found their proper slot. Elizabeth arrives the next day. She's 11, 5 years older than you, and she arrives with her own retinue from Ashridge in Hertfordshire. 20 miles from Hatfield, but a world away in terms of your daily experience, since you never go there and she never comes to Hatfield, and the letters between you are occasional and friendly, and entirely mediated by the adults who draft them and carry them. In person, she is different from the letters in the way that everyone is different from their letters. More angular, more immediate, more specific. Her hair is very red. your father's red. And she moves through rooms with the attention-gathering quality of someone who is aware of being looked at and has made a decision about how she feels about that. She's pleased to see you. Her pleasure is genuine and also theatrical. She has, even at 11, the instinct for presentation that will apparently become a lifelong characteristic, the ability to make whatever she's feeling into a slightly enhanced version of itself for the room's benefit. She grabs your hands and makes her eyes very wide and says that you've grown so tall, which you haven't particularly, but which she says with such conviction that for a moment you believe it yourself. We're never all in the same place, she says, glancing between you and Mary. It seems wrong somehow. All three of us in different houses. It's practical, Mary says, in the tone of someone who has used this word before on this subject and finds it insufficient but true. Practical, Elizabeth repeats, with a small, sceptical inflection that is, you'll understand later, quite characteristically hers. And here you are, the three royal children of Henry VIII, all in the same room at the same time, which apparently happens so rarely that even the servants seem to notice it, stealing glances at the three of you with the air of people witnessing something unusual. You are related by blood and by title, and by the fact of sharing a father who is the largest presence in your lives despite being so seldom physically present in them. You are strangers who are family. You are family who are strangers. Mary is careful and contained, the wariness old in her. Elizabeth is bright and quick, and already, at 11, seems to be performing a version of herself that she's selected from among possible versions. And you are 6, and you're tired from the journey, and you're watching your sisters with the particular observation of a child who has spent most of his life in the company of adults and has developed a sensitivity to the specific frequencies of human interaction that tends to go unnoticed in children who are around other children constantly. You like them. You are glad they exist. You wish you saw them more. You will not say this. It wouldn't change anything if you did. On the 4th day at court, your father takes you riding. This is unscheduled, unannounced. Mistress Penny receives word that morning with the expression of someone trying to decide how to feel about something that is good news but also requires rapid reorganization. And you are dressed and ready and in the stable yard within the hour, and your father is already there, enormous on an enormous horse, surrounded by a cluster of gentlemen who rearrange themselves around you as you arrive. He doesn't ride like a man with a bad leg. That's the first thing. He manages the horse differently, with more use of the upper body and reins and less of the contact of leg and stirrup on the left side. But the management is so habitual, so long practiced, that it reads simply as style, a particular way of sitting that is his own. Brutus, your sensible bay gelding, is almost comically smaller than your father's horse, which is great grey stallion that moves with the particular authority of an animal that knows it is the most powerful thing in the immediate vicinity. You ride in the Hampton Court Park for 2 hours. Your father doesn't talk much while riding. The effort of managing the horse takes more from him than it once did, and the conversation he does offer is brief and direct, pointing out things as they pass. A stand of oak trees older than the palace, a section of the park wall that was built by Cardinal Wolsey before the palace was given to the crown, a hawk circling overhead. He names the hawk species from a distance, with the confident specificity of someone who has spent a great deal of time with hawks and retains the knowledge even when the hawks themselves have been largely given up. You should practice the lance, he says at one point. Yes, Your Majesty. When you're older. I rode at the lists at 14. A pause. I was different then. A shorter pause. The lance teaches you something about commitment. Once you've levelled it, there's no stopping. You commit to the contact. The Rubicon, you think. You don't say this. Yes, Your Majesty. He looks at you sideways. Something in his expression. Your tutor tells me you work hard. I try to, Your Majesty. Don't just try. Work hard because it is what's required, not because it impresses anyone. The impression is not the point. The knowing is the point. Yes, Your Majesty. You'll be king, he says, not dramatically, not as a gift or a warning, as a fact stated in the same tone as the names of trees and hawks. The knowing is what will make the difference between a good king and a great one, between a great king and the other kind. He returns his attention to the park. The grey stallion moves under him with the steadiness of a very good horse, carrying a very experienced rider. The partnership old and understood between them. You ride in silence for a while. Father, you say, and then stop. You've used the word, not Your Majesty. Father. You've never done this in a formal context. You're not sure if it was a mistake. He looks at you. Yes, he says, just yes, not correcting the word. Not the pause of formal distance that would indicate the word was wrong. When will we, you stop, recalibrate? When do you think I might come to court again? A moment. When the ambassadors have been dealt with, he says. The winter is complicated. You know I'm campaigning in France? Yes, Your Majesty. When that resolves. Spring, perhaps. Or summer. A pause. It's not ideal, this arrangement. I'm aware of that. You wait. This is more than he said about the arrangement before. A prince's education requires stability, he says. A fixed place, fixed tutors, fixed routines. The court is not stable. The court moves. It changes. It requires things from people that a child shouldn't be required to do yet. He's looking at the distance, at the park, at something you can't see. I was not given a choice in my own arrangements when I was young. When my brother died and I became the heir, everything changed overnight. I was prepared for one life and required to live another. He stops riding. The horse stops. The gentlemen of the escort pull back discreetly. Just you and him in the middle of the park. The preparation matters, he says. The years at Hatfield, the lessons, the routines. This is not exile. Do you understand that? Yes, you say. And then more honestly, I'm trying to understand it. Something in his face. Something you file away to examine later, when you have more categories to put it in. Good, he says. That's the right answer. He touches his horse and they move forward again, and the escort reforms and the ride continues, and the moment passes the way moments do when they're real. Immediately, into memory, into the accumulating archive of what you carry with you. 8 days at court, 8 days of supper in the great hall and audiences and your sisters and the clock in the courtyard and your father's enormous presence radiating through every room, even the ones he isn't in, the way heat radiates from stone, and then the carriage, and then the road, and then Hatfield, appearing on the afternoon of the second day of the return journey with the specific quality of something that is both familiar and slightly surprising every time. The house smaller than Hampton Court, quieter, its red brick different from the palace red, less monumental, more domestic, the deer in the park moving with no particular urgency through the late afternoon light. Mistress Penn is watching you as the carriage stops at the main entrance. Welcome home, she says. You look at the house, the frost-touched garden, the smoke from the chimneys, the sound of the establishment, familiar sounds, the particular acoustic of Hatfield, the specific timbre of Check's estate, your management, your small kingdom within a kingdom. Thank you, you say, and you mean it. Both things, the welcome and the home. The transition back is immediate and total. Within an hour you're in your room, the familiar room, the ceiling of grey stone above you, the fire built up by the groom who has clearly been keeping it ready. Your clothes are removed and the court clothes folded and stored. The travelling clothes are taken to be aired and brushed. Mistress Penn is reviewing the household in your absence with the chamberlain, both of them working through a list with professional efficiency. Tomorrow. Check. The passage from Caesar that was waiting. Tonight, supper, small and quiet in the back room, the food good and plain, and the silence of a house that is not performing itself. You eat, you sleep. In the dark with the sounds of Hatfield around you, smaller sounds than Hampton Court, more intimate, the particular creak of this house rather than the grand reverberations of a palace. You take out the memory of the ride in the park and examine it carefully. I was not given a choice in my own arrangements. The preparation matters. This is not exile. You're 6 years old and you're learning to hold two true things in your head at once. That the house at Hatfield is not where you would choose to be, and that the house at Hatfield is where you need to be. That the distance from your father is real, and the reason for the distance is real, and both things can be true simultaneously without cancelling each other out. This is possibly the most important thing you've learned so far. More important than Caesar, more important than the Greek. The weeks accumulate. November passes in the particular grey English way, the days shortening until it seems like the light barely bothers arriving before it leaves again. The fire in the schoolroom necessary from first thing in the morning. The garden losing its last colour to frost. The deer huddling closest to the tree line where there's some shelter from the wind. Check finishes Caesar with you and begins Livy, the longer, more complex history of Rome, which requires more effort and provides proportionally more satisfaction, the satisfaction of a harder task. The French master declares your art acceptable, which from Dubois is effusive praise. The music master adjusts your hand position on the lute strings and something clicks, not literally, but in the way of a physical understanding falling into place. And suddenly the chord you've been struggling with for 3 weeks produces a sound that is actually what it's supposed to be, a complete resonance from all the strings together, and you play it again immediately to confirm, and it does it again, and something in your chest lifts. New roommate, you've started calling him, though his name is William, who is from Suffolk, who is 14, new to the household as a junior page. He is perpetually uncertain about procedures and performs his duties with the exaggerated care of someone who has not yet internalized the routines enough to do them automatically, and therefore must do each one deliberately, which makes each one visible in a way that the long-practiced routines of Mistress Penn and the senior staff are not. You watch him from the corner of your eye during his duties, and you understand the uncertainty, because you remember the uncertainty. The period before Hatfield's rhythms became your own rhythms, when everything required active attention. You don't tell him this. You wouldn't know how to explain it to a 14-year-old boy that you, a 6-year-old prince, understand his feeling about institutional routines. It would be strange. He would be confused. You'd be expected to be above such considerations. But you notice. You always notice. December arrives with snow. Actual snow. The garden transformed overnight from dead brown and grey-green to a white that makes the familiar unfamiliar. The shapes of the knot garden softened and smoothed under the snow, the gravel paths invisible. You're allowed outside briefly, wrapped in so many layers that movement is substantially impeded. to see the park in the snow, which is extraordinary in a way that the ordinary park is not, the deer having retreated entirely, only their tracks visible in the white, and the tracks of birds, and the occasional clean print of a fox that crossed the garden path sometime in the night. The snow stays for 3 days. On the second day, Chick arrives despite the conditions. He has walked from his lodgings in the village, which is not a great distance, but in the snow requires effort, and he arrives with cold reddened cheeks and snow on his boots, and the look of a man who has decided that weather is insufficient reason to break a teaching schedule. You respect this. You tell him so. A cold walk clears the mind, he says. The Stoics believed that physical discomfort was useful for mental clarity. Seneca walked regardless of conditions. Was Seneca from England? A brief pause. No, he was from Cordoba, Spain. So he didn't know English winters. A longer pause. Something in Chick's expression that, for a man who generally maintains the expression of a scholar supervising a translation, is remarkably close to amused. A fair point, your grace. Nevertheless, the principle holds. The Christmas season comes to Hatfield in the form of a modest celebration. There is music, there are special foods, there is the ceremonial decoration of the house with greenery brought in from the park, the smell of pine and holly sharp and resinous in the cold air, which changes the smell of every room it's in, overriding the wood smoke and the stone cold with something that smells like the outside brought indoors. The cook produces a plum pudding that is genuinely extraordinary, dense and dark and fragrant with spices that have travelled from places you could find on a map but can't entirely imagine. Cinnamon and cloves and nutmeg from somewhere in the Spice Islands, which Czech has mentioned in the context of Portuguese navigation, which in the context of your current reading connects to Roman trade routes through the Middle East. Everything connecting to everything in the way that a properly organised mind begins to see connections once it has enough categories to connect. The Christmas gift from your father arrives with a messenger 2 days before Christmas. It is a book, not the simple, devotional illustrated kind that Mary brought. A proper scholarly volume bound in leather, with tooled decoration on the cover, heavy in the hand, smelling of good parchment, and the particular ink smell of a new printing. You read the title and then read it again. The Praise of Folly by Erasmus. You open it. The dedication is to Thomas More, who was executed 8 years ago in the Tower. This is not something you've asked about directly, but you know it, in the way you know things you've been told obliquely by adults managing your information carefully. Thomas More, the Chancellor who would not agree with your father about the Queen and the Church, and who therefore died for the disagreement. And your father sent you a book that Erasmus dedicated to Thomas More. You sit with this for a while, the book in your lap, the fire crackling. Then you open to the first page and begin to read. It will be years before you understand everything your father meant by the gift. Perhaps you'll never understand all of it. But you understand some part of it now, at 6, in the way that children understand things that are too large for them. Not the whole, but a shape of it, an outline against the light. He sent you a book about thinking carefully, about seeing clearly, about the distance between what things appear to be and what they are, from a man who has throughout his life made the closing of that distance spectacularly, consequentially difficult. Your father is many things. You're beginning to understand that the many things don't cancel each other out, any more than the distance from you to Hatfield cancels the warmth of his hand around yours. The winter continues. January is the coldest month. the basin ice every morning thick enough to require real effort to break, your hands cold before you've finished washing your face, your breath visible in the room even with the fire going. Check teachers with his coat on and occasionally with gloves, removing them only when he needs to handle the books or write. You write with stiff fingers, and your handwriting suffers for it, the letters slightly smaller and less even than they are in warmer months. The quill requiring more pressure to compensate for the reduced sensitivity of cold fingers. This is fine. Check notes it and makes no comment. There are conditions and then there are responses to conditions, and the response to January at Hatfield is to work with what you have, which is cold hands and good Latin, and a fire that needs stoking every 2 hours, and the long white light of winter coming through windows that don't manage the cold as well as anyone would like. On a morning in late January, the household secretary brings you something that is not a letter from court, but that comes from court's direction. A new document, formal, sealed, setting out certain additional requirements for your education and household management. The requirements come from the Privy Council, which means they've been approved by your father and which means they carry the weight of authority that everything from your father carries, the authority that is felt in rooms before anyone has spoken. The new requirements include an expansion of the languages to be taught, with Italian added to the existing French, an increase in the time devoted to theological education with specific texts listed, a requirement that certain courtly skills, dancing and the deportment required for formal occasions, be formally instructed rather than assumed, and a note that the prince's household expenses for the coming year have been authorised at a specific sum, which the secretary reads out to the chamberlain in a tone that indicates both the magnitude and the finality of the figure. The dancing master arrives 2 weeks later. He is Italian, a small man with extraordinary posture and an accent that turns every sentence into something that sounds more interesting than it probably is. His name is, according to Mistress Penn, an English approximation of an Italian name that the English tongue has done some violence to, and he teaches you the galliard and the pavane and the branle with the patient intensity of someone who believes that how you move your body through a room is as much a part of your education as how you move your mind through a text. The body, he says, demonstrating the opening steps of the galliard, is an instrument, like the lute. Yes, you learn the lute. I am told you learn the lute, and you learn to coax from it the sounds that are wanted. The body is the same. You coax from the body the movements that tell the room what it should know about you. The galliard involves jumping. Specifically, it involves a sequence of steps that culminates in a leap, a proper, committed, get off the ground and land again leap, which is the most physically demanding thing you've been asked to do in a formal educational context, and which initially produces results that could generously be described as inconsistent. The Italian dancing master watches your first several attempts with an expression that is carefully neutral. Again, he says, you jump again. The landing, you must arrive, not fall, there is a difference. You jump again. By the end of the lesson, something has shifted. The landing is better, still not right, but better. You can feel the difference in your knees and ankles. The sensation of absorbing the impact deliberately, bending into it rather than jarring against it. It is a physical lesson that is also, like most things in your life, a lesson about something beyond the physical. Arrive, don't fall, there is a difference. February arrives, and with it, a letter from Elizabeth. Not from court, from her own household at Ashridge. She has apparently decided, on her own initiative, to write to you directly rather than through the formal channels, which means the letter comes through those channels anyway. There is no correspondence in either of your lives that is not managed and read by appropriate parties, but the voice of it is hers, the theatrical genuine voice, in written form, on paper, in a handwriting that is already excellent. She is learning Italian herself, she writes. Her Italian master is dreadful, but she has found better instruction in a book. She's been reading Petrarch in the Italian, which requires work but repays it. She's been permitted to ride more this winter than last. She has been working on a translation of her own, a devout text, which she plans to present to the Queen as a gift, and which is more than 3 months in progress, the most demanding project she's undertaken, and she is proud of it in a way that she almost but not quite admits in the letter. She asks about your galliard. You write back. Czech reads the draft, makes one small suggestion about phrasing, and then the fair copy is made and goes through the channels and presumably reaches Elizabeth sometime in the first week of March. Spring comes late and badly, cold and wet. April more like March, the frost returning twice after it seemed done. The garden attempts green, but has to keep stopping and starting, a hesitant greening that is also stubborn, pushing through the cold returns with the specific determination of growing things. A pair of robins, you can't be certain it's the same one from autumn, but it might be, establishes itself in the holly bush at the corner of the garden near the south wall, and there is a nest, and then at some point in mid-April there are eggs, and then in early May, with the weather finally deciding to commit to spring, there are chicks. Cheek, unexpectedly, finds this instructive. The robin, he says, on a morning when you've been watching through the garden window instead of attending properly to Livy, demonstrates something interesting about the care of the young. The parents bring food continuously. The ratio of effort to recipient is, in that nest, entirely inverted from what it will later be. The parents do everything. The chicks do nothing except exist and require. A pause. This does not persist, he says. The chicks grow. They develop the capacity to leave the nest. And then they must leave the nest. Because the nest is for nestlings, and the world is for birds. You look at him. He looks at you with the evaluative expression. Livy, he says, Book 5. You return to Livy. The summer is better. The warmth arrives in June with the relief of something that has been delayed and knows it. Long, warm days that make the garden a different place. The smell of it different. Hot stone and warm grass, and the particular sweetness of the roses that bloom along the south wall in waves, first one kind and then another as June becomes July. You're allowed into the garden more in summer, the protocol slightly loosened by the warmth in the way that protocols sometimes respond to weather. You walk in the garden after lessons, sometimes alone except for the following escort, and the aloneness, the relative aloneness, is a pleasure that you notice and appreciate because you have learned to notice and appreciate it. The robin chicks have gone since late May. The nest is empty in the holly bush, neatly made and abandoned, a small architectural fact of the garden. Czech has said nothing more about it. He doesn't need to. A letter arrives in July that says, "Come to court in August for the visit of the French ambassador. Bring appropriate retinue. Planned for 10 days. You count down again. 14 days. This time counting, you feel something different underneath the anticipation. Not dread. Not exactly. But a complexity that wasn't there before or wasn't as visible. Because you know now what court means. The grandness and the performance, and the thing of being a prince in the public sense, which is different from being a prince at Hatfield. You know what your father looks like in those chairs. You know the smell of the receiving rooms. You know the quality of the day when he is present in it compared to the quality of the day when he isn't. And you know that 10 days will end. They always end. But here is the thing that has changed between November and August. The thing that you understand now that you didn't then. The ending is not the failure of the visit. The ending is the visit doing its job. You go to court, you see your father, you learn something, or several things, that Hatfield can't teach you. How to be in a room full of people watching you. How to carry your own presence without being either diminished or excessive in it. How the king looks when he talks to ambassadors compared to how he looks when he talks to you. All the gradations of the public and the private that you're still learning to read, and then you come back. And the knowing comes back with you, is added to the knowing already here. The Greek and the Latin and the Galliard and the trick with the lute strings and the robin's nest in the holly bush, and everything Czech has taught you by not saying it directly. The preparation matters. August comes warm and certain. The longest days already past, but the heat still present. The countryside dried and golden in the way of late English summer. The harvest beginning in the fields you pass on the road to Hampton Court. The hay already in. The grain stalks gold against a blue sky. Workers in the fields visible from the carriage. The small figures of people engaged in the enormous annual labour that feeds a country. You watch them from the window and think, in the way you've been trained to think about what you're seeing. The economics of it, the labour, the relationship between the fields and the cities, between the workers and the crown that ultimately holds the land. Everything connects to everything. This is what Czech has been teaching you. You understand now. Not Latin specifically, or Greek specifically, or Livy, or Caesar, or the Galliard. The capacity to see the connections. The habit of mind that doesn't stop at the first answer but asks what the first answer is made of, and what that is made of, and what that is made of, until you reach something that feels like the underlying shape of the world. You are 7 now. Your birthday came in October, quietly, as birthdays in your household come, with a modest celebration, a special supper, a gift from Mistress Penn which was warm and practical, good gloves, finer than your everyday ones, and a gift from Czech which was, inevitably, a book, this one Cicero's on the Republic, with certain passages already marked in the margins with Czech's fine, precise hand. You are 7, and you have lived most of your life at Hatfield, and you have seen your father perhaps a dozen times in total, and your mother died before you could form a memory of her, and your sisters are 20 miles and 40 miles away, and the court is 2 days' journey, and the world is large and complicated, and you are, in the midst of it, a prince in a household in Hertfordshire who is very good at Greek and getting better at the Galliard. The carriage rolls toward Hampton Court. The late summer fields pass the window, through the gap in the curtain, the road, and beyond it the countryside, and beyond that the sky, still blue, still enormous, still as different to the specific contents of the carriages moving through it. You are 7, you have a long way to go, and you have learned. This is the thing, this is what you carry now more clearly than anything, that the going is itself the preparation. That the days at Hatfield are not the gap between the real things. They are the real things. The lessons, the garden, the fire, the counted days, the letters carried on horseback, the connection that persists across distances because it is built into the structure of things, the way stone holds cold and holds heat in turn, The way Hatfield is yours not because you chose it, but because you have lived in it long enough for it to have shaped the person doing the living. The court will be the court. Your father will be enormous and warm and complicated and occasionally absent even when present. Mary will be careful. Elizabeth will be performing a selected version of herself. The ambassadors will stand in ranks and your father will receive them, and the business of the kingdom will proceed with the inexorable momentum of things that don't stop. And then you'll come back, and the robin will or won't be in the holly bush, and Cheek will have left a passage, and the fire will be built up, and Mistress Penny will say welcome home and mean it, and you will nod, and mean it too. The sun is going down over the fields when the towers of Hampton Court first appear on the horizon, small with distance, growing as the carriage moves toward them with the patient inevitability of arrival. The light at this hour catches the red brick and turns it darker, more orange than red, the chimneys threading their smoke into a sky that is shifting toward the deep blue of evening. The first stars are visible if you look, not yet bright, but there, present, already running their ancient schedules. You watch them until the carriage turns and Hampton Court fills the window. Here is the thing about stars, you think, that Cheek hasn't mentioned yet and that you haven't asked about yet, but that you understand in the body. They don't know they're being looked at. They don't perform their light for the watcher. They simply are what they are, consistently in the dark, regardless of whether anyone is watching. That's something worth being. Consistent in the dark, whatever comes. The carriage stops. The door opens. You step out into the summer evening, into the smell of the river and the heat-soaked stone and the vast familiar foreignness of the palace. And you stand for a moment in the courtyard while the retinue reorganizes itself around you, the organized movement of your household finding its arrangement, and you are a prince in a courtyard in 1545 and you're 7 years old, and you have so much yet to learn, so much yet to understand, so many years of the preparation still ahead of you, but you're ready for this evening. That's enough. That's what you know how to be. Ready for the thing that's in front of you right now. Because the thing in front of you right now is where you are. And where you are is where the work happens. You walk into the gatehouse. The astronomical clock on the tower above measures the hour, the month, the phase of the moon, the position of the sun, the turning of the spheres as anyone in the 16th century understands them. The great cosmic mechanism that contains everything, that has been running since before there were eyes to read its face, that will keep running long after all the eyes in this courtyard are closed. It does not pause for you. You do not expect it to. You go to see your father. This is the longest the night gets sometimes, when you've listened to enough history to feel the weight of it. The weight of a child navigating the specific loneliness of being important before you're old enough to want to be, of being prepared for a life that no one can quite tell you how to live until you're already living it. That weight is real. It's the weight of all the rooms where preparation happens, all the stone corridors and cold basins and lute strings and Greek verbs and letters arriving on horseback with love encoded in formal sentences. You've been carrying something tonight. Let it rest. The fire the way fires get late at night. Not blazing, not gone, just present. Warmth without drama. Warmth that doesn't ask anything of you except that you be near it. Wherever you are right now, the air around you is warmer than Tudor Hertfordshire in November. You have that. Hold it. The cold that Edward felt coming up through the floorboards, the ice in the basin, the stiff fingers over the quill. None of that is yours tonight. You are warm. You are still. You're not required to perform anything for anyone in this moment. No one is curtsying. No one is waiting outside your door. You don't have to hold the knife correctly. Just breathe. The way the house at Hatfield breathed at night, the slow settling of old stone, the fire going down, the sounds of the world outside getting quieter and quieter, until they were just a suggestion of the world rather than the world itself. Let the sounds around you now do the same thing. Let them quiet, not disappear, just quiet. You're not in Tudor England. You're here, in your version of the warm room, in your version of the present, which is its own kind of preparation for its own kind of tomorrow. The robin in the holly bush didn't need to know where it was going when it left the nest. It needed to know how to fly, and it had learned how to fly, and so it went. You know how to fly in whatever way matters for you. The rest gets learned in the going. Tomorrow there will be the things that tomorrow always brings. The list, the requirement, the moment when you have to be the version of yourself that shows up and works. But that's tomorrow. That's the daylight thing, the active thing, the thing with demands and decisions and the specific shape of whatever your life currently contains. Tonight, this is the thing. Just this. The warmth of a room, the quiet of a night that doesn't need anything from you. The slow drift of thoughts becoming less and less insistent, less and less like thoughts, and more like the suggestion of thoughts, shapes moving through water, present for a moment and then not. Edward went to sleep in the attic room at Hatfield, in the cold of the northern English winter, counting the days to the next time he would see his father, with the Cicero cheque had left on the desk and the sound of the house settling around him, and the long patience of preparation still ahead. He became king at 9 years old. He read Cicero at 6. He counted the days to Hampton Court, and he named the robin in the holly bush, and he learned to land properly from the galliard, and he worked at the Greek until it came naturally, and he carried the warmth of his father's hand in his memory like an ember for months at a time. He did all of that, in the rooms where preparation happens, in the cold mornings, in the long afternoons, in the quiet evenings when the fire was the most dramatic thing occurring. He did it. And tonight that is not something you need to do anything with. Tonight that is just a story, a real one. That's enough. Let your breathing slow. Let the thoughts keep arriving and keep passing, the way clouds move across a sky that was here before them and will be hereafter. Let the weight you've been carrying set itself down somewhere you don't have to hold it. You've done enough today. You've been enough. The cold stone ceiling that Edward watched in the dark at Hatfield has been gone for centuries. The house has been rebuilt and rebuilt again. The holly bush where the robin nested is long past. The frost on the garden path has melted 10,000 times. The letters carried on horseback between Hatfield and Ashridge, and Hunsdon and Hampton Court have long since gone to dust. But something stays. Something about the preparing, something about the carrying of warmth across distances, something about the way love operates through intermediaries, through letters, through lessons, through the specific gravity of a father's hand, through the gift of a book that requires years to fully understand. Something about learning to be still. You know how to do that. You're doing it now. Let sleep come the way it comes when you stop trying. Not decided, not achieved, just arrived, the way the spring arrives after the winter, not dramatically, just quietly there when the conditions are finally right. The conditions are right. You're warm enough, safe enough, still enough. The world outside is doing what the world outside does, and it will be there tomorrow, and tomorrow you'll be in it, And that's all fine and all true, and none of it is needed right now. Right now there is just this, just rest, just the long, slow drift. Let it take you. Good night.